Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have a very special guest, Ann Sei Lin. Ann, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I was so happy to be able to connect with you on Twitter. As soon as I saw your book, I was like, added it to Goodreads, had to do the follow. I think I sent you the, Twitter message about doing an interview probably like 30 seconds after I had gotten off of Goodreads. It was definitely my kind of novel. So really excited to, ask you questions today and how you came up with such great ideas. So, all right. So we'll do that first question there. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
It's a bit funny. So I've been writing since I could hold a pen, which is probably what a lot of people also experienced. But I didn't start writing seriously until university. And at that point, I started sending out query letters to agents, started seriously thinking about publishing. And I got an agent just as I left university. We did some edits, things didn't work out, and I was gutted because I felt like I'd been back at the bottom of a mountain that I was climbing.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, I got myself out of that hole, and I started writing that book again, and I sent it out again. And this time I got an agent, and that agent loved it, and we sent it to publishers, and we got a publisher on board, and then COVID happened.
Oh.
So it's always been a bit of a circuitous journey where it feels like you're inching up a mountain, but then rocks fall and everybody dies and you're back at the bottom. But yes, eventually we've got to the point where the book has come out. It came out on May the 5th. But I think there's a lesson there that writing is never a smooth journey. It's always full of rocks and alligators that want to bite your leg off.
Definitely true. Definitely true. I had Scott Drakeford on at the end of season 1, and he said the same thing. I mean, he published through Tor, and it was like almost 2.5 years because of COVID, from start to finish. And that's not, in terms of, publishing the book. So yeah, definitely. It's interesting with COVID. It seems like you always have something that happens, right? But of course, COVID had to just enhance those problems for everybody. So, but, congratulations to you, for getting it out there despite COVID. I think it's awesome to see authors like yourself who, just refuse to back down or like, I'm getting this book out. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint.
I think that's one of the best ways I've heard to put it, honestly. I actually was just on TikTok, and one of the authors that I follow, she said the same thing. Like she had book 4 come out, and she was like, oh, I had a couple of edits that didn't make it for some reason, and a couple of misspellings, and she was like, and then this and that happened, and she said the same thing. So I definitely agree with you. For that second question there, so what genre do you currently write in, and how did you decide on this genre?
So at the moment I write exclusively fantasy, and at the moment I'm writing Asian fantasy because I think the genre chose me more than I chose the genre. Because when I was little, I read almost exclusively fantasy, and that's been stuck on me ever since. And I can't really imagine myself writing something that isn't fantasy. Maybe I will broaden out in the genre, like I will write contemporary fantasy or I'll write epic fantasy, but I think I'm always going to stay in fantasy.
That's fair. I don't blame you there. I have a couple of science fiction things I like to do, urban fantasy, but fantasy just in general. My friend, he's like, you have too many fantasy authors on your podcast. I was like, those are the circles I travel in, on Twitter and stuff. So I'm trying to get more, science fiction and, historical fiction or things like that. But what exactly got you into fantasy? Like, I know for myself, there were couple particular books, Forgotten Realms in particular, opened my mind to so many different authors that were amazing. Like, so what was it exactly about fantasy that, drew you in?
I think that being the shy nerd that I was as a child, I just wanted to escape to somewhere else. And fantasy was that, gateway drug into going somewhere that is not here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I read like the epic fantasies like Robin Hobb and Tolkien, of course. And then I sort of tried to broaden that scope with fantasy authors from different places and different time periods. But yeah, there's such variety in fantasy that you can have 10 different fantasy authors and they can be writing completely different things.
Yeah.
And that's what I really love about the genre.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that my friend just asked me today, he's like, why do you write only fantasy or sci-fi? I'm like, I said, I'm a teacher. I said, we deal with so many real world issues, particularly after, the last couple of weeks. It just seems like after COVID, it seems like things keep, speaking of mountains, it seems like it's been a marathon and a sprint the last, 2 years. And I'm like, I don't want to come home and write stories about things I deal with on a daily basis, And if I do, I want them to be where they can be solved with some sort of fantastical element. I don't know, just it makes it more fun. I like how you said that it's a good escape, right? And fantasy, I think, to me, it's the best escape.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's awesome. So for that third one there, so I'm really excited about this question. So what is your book Rebel Skies about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Ooh, okay. So Rebel Skies is a teen fantasy novel. It's set in a fantastical version of the Meiji era of Japan. And for readers or listeners who aren't familiar with Japanese history, it's kind of like the Industrial Revolution-ish.
Oh, cool.
So there's a fantastical version, so with sky cities and airships and things like that. And it follows the adventures of this girl who is a waitstaff aboard a floating banquet hall.
Oh, cool.
And one day her best friend is injured, and when he's injured, she learns some things about herself and her friend, which triggers this epic journey on which she has to go to try and save him. And a part of that story is that there are people in this world who have origami magic, which we may get to later, that can use paper and to do various things with paper. And so she also starts studying that and learning how to control paper as she goes on this quest to save her friend.
Oh, that's awesome. As soon as I saw that on your Goodreads, I think you had a post about it. That's when I was sold. I was like, okay, I got to have her on the podcast. And that just sounds so interesting to me. We were just talking about this the other day with one of my friends. I think it's Mark Tim and I are discussing this. And, like my friend, I sent them, one of my chapters, and he's like, my best friend's like, he's like, you really don't like that contemporary stuff, do you? I said, no, I like to read it. But I said, like your idea, being on an airship and a waste, I mean, that's a totally different angle, and origami magic, it's like, my friend, he's like, well, it's the same old in fantasy. I said, you clearly haven't been reading fantasy within the last 5 years. Cause I said, there are so many people like yourself that, really are expanding the genre into, something new, I would say, and it's interesting. Like you already said, where people are starting to divide fantasy even more. So in the future, we had a debate a while back on Twitter where some friends and I we were like, oh, are we going to have, contemporary fantasy as being its own section, and then, kind of like the Amazon style within bookstores, because, it's interesting. I was talking about historical urban fantasy is something I would like to write, versus just regular, urban fantasy. And yeah, so that's a really cool idea. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, there's so much variety. It's really different. Yeah.
Well, I just feel like, I think the last 5 years with traditional, and I think the traditional market has listened to the indie market.
Yeah.
with ideas like yours, where it's like, it's not, I personally don't write, like I have my own fantasy world things I'm writing, but like, and it's really big, but like, I, I guess I have like kind of a Viking culture, but I don't really have like a, like a English or Scottish type of, medieval, European setting. I feel like everything's pretty much, like I have a lot of Asian fantasy, which I love because I love Asian history. I'm a history teacher. And it's my favorite time period is Tokugawa. Samurai are absolutely amazing. And I just love the times were changing, and you get all these different, situations in there and interesting things that happen to people. But, I just think that it's cool for me because I like new ideas, particularly in fantasy. So with your book, I was like, yep, got to get that right now. So I did not wait very long for the Kindle. So it was it's probably on there within 5 minutes. So yeah, definitely my kind of story. So that's really, really cool. So for that fourth one, so I was just curious, do you have a title or outline or anything yet for book 2, or are you still still in the works with that one? Or
It's funny that you should ask, because I've written book 2. It's with my editor now.
Oh, that's exciting.
We're arguing about titles because she has said Rebel Storms, and I think, oh, that's a bit too Star Warsy, and so the title is still a work in progress, but the book itself has been written already.
No, that's awesome. I feel like the title is the hardest part sometimes. Like I just usually slap something on there until it's done and figure the rest will come later. But I just looked at a couple on my website. I was like, I like works in progress. I was like, those are probably all going to change. But I do like your first title though. That really drew me in. So I definitely agree with you that, titles are, important for advertising, and, that one really hit me. And I loved your cover too, by the way. The cover, I felt like the blurb, everything worked really well together. So
yeah, it's pretty gorgeous. I have it with me all the time.
Yeah,
everywhere.
I actually just sent it to a couple friends of mine, because I had a friend of mine and she seemed to want a similar style to yours. So I sent it to her. I said, well, I'm having Ann on, this week. I said, I really think you should check this out. And she fell in love with the cover as well. She was like, oh, that just fits. She's like, this style. So she actually took it to her, her artist, and they're trying to come up with something similar to fit. So yeah, so just so you know.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was like, that's really cool. So she's like, make sure you tell her. I said, I'll tell her. So yeah, so that was really awesome. But yeah, that's a cool cover. I was very jealous when I saw that, and then I read the blurb. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. So yeah, that's awesome. So for the fifth question there, so what are some things that you found different with writing book 2 versus book 1? This is always an interesting one for me because I know a lot of people have different experiences with it. Some people it's harder, some people it's easier. What were your general experiences with writing book 2 versus book 1?
Book 2 is in a bit of a funny place because a lot of the setup has already been done. But you also have to sort of build upon everything that is in book 1. So I found it a lot more fun because I don't have to spend so much time doing world building and putting the building blocks together. But also at the same time, there were characters that completely infuriated me because I thought I might have written myself into a few holes, and then there was the challenge of how do I get myself out of some of these holes. So yeah, it was an up and down experience.
Yeah. So I just was curious. So a lot of people have said this. It's just nice that we've had a lot of people that have written book 2 and 3 recently. So the world building, everybody seems to think, or say that the world building was easier. Would you say that it was harder to deepen your characterization for the characters that you already had from book 1? Or do you think that was maybe for you was a little bit easier, like you kind of knew where they were going, or was that maybe something that was a little bit more challenging?
I think that it was actually easier for me to do the characterization in book 2 and deepen it because there are less things distracting from the characters. In book 1, you have to set up the journey, you have to set up the world, and then there's all these things that are sort of vying for your attention. But in book 2, you've already got the journey, you've got the world more or less, and you can build upon that. But there's less things sort of vying for your character's attention.
Yeah.
So,
Now, when you wrote book 1, did you have any ideas already where you were going with book 2, or were you kind of like done with book 1 and like, okay, now I can piece it together? Like some people have done that, whoever interviewed recently. Some other people have had like all 5 outlined. Like how did you go about? I'm just curious because I'm trying to figure out after my book 1, like I'm like, I have no idea. Like I kind of have an idea, but not really. I'm just kind of a pantser, so I'm trying to outline better, I guess, and figure out the trilogy ahead of time. Not write myself into so many corners, I guess. But what do you think about that process?
I think, I think the pantser versus the planner thing is is a very good description of how people are. Or as some people like to say, are you a gardener or are you an architect?
Yeah.
But I'm definitely more on the architect side in that I like to have the whole thing planned and plotted out before I start. So it's going to be a trilogy, and I already have 3 outlines done. So I know where the story is going more or less.
Okay.
So the problem is that when you actually start writing it, you start to find all these holes or these blocks that don't quite fit. So there is still some tweaking, and there's sometimes some things that I write that surprise me, even though I already kind of know the general direction that's the book is going to take.
Okay. So before book 1, then you had all 3 outlined then?
Yeah, I did. It was, in fact, my agent, before signing me, she said, I want to see your outlines. So I had to quickly scramble and put together something.
That's funny. So so you're actually the perfect person to ask about this then, because I was thinking about this a couple weeks ago. So would you say that once you outlined at least book 1 and 2, but maybe 3 in there too, did you find that once you finished book 1, you had to change quite a bit for that second outline, or did you maybe stick to them better than you thought?
Yes, it definitely had a lot of changing, because especially when you're going traditional publishing, there's a lot of hands in that part as well. So I had my 3 outlines, which I gave to my agent. And then when we got a publisher, my publisher was like, this character should go. And so that character also had to be yanked out of the outlines for book 2 and book 3. And so, yes, it was a bit of a process.
Because I talked to a couple people about this, so I'm glad you mentioned it. So like we were discussing, like would it be worth doing that for 3 books if you're just gonna have to go back? Because I know like right now, like I know my next, for draft 2, I know my next 3 chapters, what needs to be fixed. But after that, it's like I have to re-outline the whole book.
Yeah.
And I know that when I had started outline 2, I was like, oh well, almost all that had to be scrapped. So part of me was like, I just need to learn how to become more of an architect, I guess. And I'm not even that much of a gardener, so I don't know why I thought I could garden, But yeah, that's very interesting though. I find those questions more interesting than some of the other ones, because for me that just gives reassurance that you can at least give some sort of planned outline for a trilogy, and just go back and fix things along the way. But yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. I'm gonna have to try that in the future, because I've written myself into too many holes recently and can't seem to get myself out of them. So when it comes to characterization, so what do you feel is the most important in making your characters feel real and relatable?
I think that this sounds counterintuitive, but it's always to have them have some things that don't quite make sense about them, because people in real life aren't always these logical beings. So I think that it's always good to have things that are very instinctive to them, that kind of don't quite make sense. You can see where they're coming from, but it's a bit to have these contradictions inside them. I also think that it's good to have both an external and an internal kind of conflict. So, for example, my main character is called Karara. Her external conflict is that she has to go on this quest to save her best friend. But internally, she has this conflict in that she's been brought up as a waitstaff, and she's sort of been trained to be very quiet and demure and to, not speak her mind. But she's also got this inner fire in her where she wants to sort of say things, and then that kind of conflict of, oh, should I say this, should I not say this, is what gives her that kind of interesting passion.
I think you make a great point there. I do like the internal and external conflicts, because if you just have one, right, without the other, it ends up being a pretty flat character. I think that, well, you mentioned Robin Hobb, so you take Fritz. Well, when doesn't he have both an internal and external conflict, right? I mean, and I think even, Bilbo and Frodo too, like Frodo's not sure, didn't really want to go on the journey, and yeah, I think any great book that I, have thought of over the years is like, oh, that made me want to write, I think has had a great, internal and external conflict going on at the same time. Because I feel like, you're right, like it's a very human thing, right, to have. And it's funny that you mentioned, like, I feel like very contradictory, because like the other day, like yesterday, I had some students come up to me with a paper and they're like, don't get mad. And I'm like, what do you mean get mad? Like, and it was like a teacher roast. So they were making fun of me and I laughed so hard. And I was like, you thought I'd be mad at this? They're like, well, some people would be. I said, well, you clearly don't know me very well. I said, I laugh at a lot of things. I said, myself is the one I probably laugh at the most. I'm hoping it helps me with reviews, because I just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I feel like I take criticism and critiques far better now than I used to. But yeah, it was really funny. But I asked him, I was like, why would you think I'd be mad at this? You're like, well, you're just always, making sure that we're treating each other nicely and, and well and stuff. And being respectful. I said, well, that's different than telling a joke, like,
Yeah.
so it was just funny that it happened yesterday to me. So I started asking myself, I was like, am I that contradictory? And then my friend, he's like, I think we all are at a certain point. So we actually had a huge discussion about that. But I feel like it's popped up online a lot too, where I'm like, you said this, but you also said this. So I definitely agree with you. I think that's probably our biggest fault as humans, is that we're so contradictory. So I like that. I never actually thought about that in terms of, characterization. So that's actually a really good piece of advice right there. That's awesome. Your character sounds great, by the way. I like somebody that, is trying to, because I feel like everybody can relate to that, that this is how you're brought up, but this is how you want to be. I feel like that's a very common theme that, particularly with young adult, that, and teenagers, that they'll be able to relate to that.
Yeah, it's especially it's one of the reasons why I also wanted to write Asian fantasy is that when I was young, all the strong female characters were always far cooler than I was, and they always spoke their minds, and they were out there kicking ass and taking names, but it was always this kind of Western view of strength, and so I want to bring in a more Eastern centric idea of what strength is.
Yeah. I like that. I was just discussing that with some kids the other day. Like yours is one of the books that I do want a physical copy, because I have a huge library in my classroom, and it is very hard to find multicultural, let alone just strong female characters, but particularly multicultural, and like I have a lot of different students. We're kind of in a weird geographical area. We're like central New York, and we're kind of on the PA border where I teach, but for Pennsylvania. But it's weird because it's very multicultural within our community. I don't know if it's because of past immigration. I think it's routes and things like that. So different people have settled there. But we have a lot of foot traffic coming in from New York City too. Which is nice. We get a lot of different cultures. But I was talking to my buddy about it, my co-teacher. I'm like, we really need to get. I have specific titles, but they're few and far between, I feel like, particularly for, for young adult, particularly for strong female leads. So yeah, that's super, super cool. But yeah, I just like when people use their experiences, to further the genre. And I feel like, we were discussing that with the kids, and then we took a lot of input from them. And it was interesting for the girls in particular. They're like, well, we want more characters that are like us. And I'm like, well, that's totally, that makes total sense. Being a white, middle-aged like male, is so easy for me, particularly, within fantasy, to see myself. And I think that, like myself, for my writing, like I don't have a lot of white middle-aged males. Like I just don't. Like you can go anywhere else and find that, and I really like to bring in different cultures, because I want my students to to be able to see themselves in those characters. But I like how you mentioned that for characterization though, so I'm definitely going to have to be thinking about that also for the future. That's really cool.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, I've been waiting for this for a while. Ever since I saw your profile on Goodreads. So can you tell me what origami magic is and how you came up with this idea?
So origami magic is basically paper magic. And there are people in the world of Rebel Skies who have the ability to use paper magic. I like to liken it to, if anybody's seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, to water bending or fire bending, but with paper. So crafters who are people who can use paper magic can use it to create these huge, fantastic paper beasts.
Oh, wow.
They can harden paper to sort of cut people's heads off.
Oh,
Nobody
awesome.
loses their heads, but
Awesome.
they could do that. And yes, they can use it in these various ways to fight or to move about and things like that. And it really comes from this part of Asian folktale and Asian mysticism, which not many people know about. It's the use of paper as magic. So there are these old Asian folktales of sorcerers who would use paper to seal away demons.
Okay.
And they also use paper in sort of exorcisms. So the idea of paper having power is quite old. It's quite buried in Asian culture. And so I wanted to take that and bring that to the forefront and share that with a variety of readers.
Sorry, I got to write that down. I'm gonna have to check that out. That is like, the writer and history teacher in me are like going crazy right now. That's super cool. I've never heard of that. So, I mean, I know different, folk tales and things like that, like one of my friends proposed to his wife with, I can't remember exactly, but like 1,000 paper cranes, and tried to, emulate one of the gods who proposed to a goddess. Obviously she said yes, because it was awesome. And he, he was really, really good at the origami too. I'm horrible at origami. I don't know if it's my fat thumbs or what. But yeah, it was really cool. And I kind of got into, certain folk tales like that. Yeah, but that's really cool. I never knew that. I'm just looking into that. I'm looking in my head, and when I had read that you had explained that just a little bit more on Goodreads with a post, I just thought, gosh, there's a lot of really cool things you could do with that. Obviously weapons. I was picturing someone like flying around on, going from like paper crane to paper crane or something like that, and like jumping from spot to spot. I was just like, because I feel like it's kind of like a Green Lantern power, like whatever you're able to think you could do. I feel like whatever you're able to make, you can, use that in terms of your magic. I feel like I feel like that was a terrific idea. I mean, there's just so many different things that you could do with that, in terms of your books. I mean, that's just I feel like it's an endless resource of, really cool and unique magic system. So I'm always jealous when people come up with a cool magic system. I feel like mine are all really boring. So you're going to have me looking around at like, maybe I'll do pencil magic in the future.
That'd be awesome, pencil magic.
Brandon Sanderson probably already did it, but yeah, that's super cool. So I just was curious, had a couple of notes from when I'd seen that on Goodreads. So, but if this gives anything away for the books, feel free to just tell us we have to read it. Can anybody use origami magic, or does it have to be like a specific person, or is it something that anybody can learn? Or
Yeah, you have to be a specific person, and the fact that only certain people can use this origami magic has one certain character is very, very angry about that.
I would be like, I'm angry that I can't, like, when anytime in school when the kids are doing origami, I'm just angry that I can't make anything like look good. I think I did like one frog one time and maybe one swan ever that looked good, but my friends did one for their wedding and we all went over to help them, and my friend, she goes, "You're not touching this paper, it's too, too expensive." So I was the one, I was like getting pizzas and stuff, I just, yeah, not very good at it. I'm pretty nimble and dexterous, but not with origami. So I've all that immediately I was like, oh, that's really cool, because I can't do that. So I think that adds, to the allure, of the magic system for me, just in general. But that's super cool. Is that the only type of magic that you have, or did you have any other? I know some people maybe have added another magic system for, book 2, or maybe there's had been mentioned in book 1 of other magic out there. Are you thinking of expanding on your magic systems at all, or just keeping it to the origami?
It is just the origami. There's 2 facets to the origami in that there are people, you can use the origami to make weapons and etc. But also there's something called a shikigami, which are creatures made out of paper, and they bond to the people who can use origami magic, and they're basically like magical familiars. So if you think his dark materials, the demons, and that, it's sort of like that, where there's a bond there, but it's a very one-sided bond in which the creatures can't disobey their masters.
Wow, that's super cool. That is really neat. My pencil magic system is looking really, really weak right now, so I'll have to work on it. I did have a friend, he did, speaking of like Asian, like history and culture, like we had taken a class together in college on the Tokugawa period, and then he got really into like calligraphy, and he ended up actually making that his magic system, which I thought was pretty cool. So, he had somebody with an ink pot, and like those were the only spell components they needed. And then they would go and then they would literally dip the brush, right? And then they would write the, the letters in the air. And then if you did it right and then said the word or whatever, I was like, oh, that is really cool. So I know that was really neat. And I was like, oh, I can't do that one because that was his idea and it was really cool. But all right, well, for that last question there, so do you have any promos, news, updates, or any current projects that you can share with us?
So book 1 is out, so go buy book 1. The Kindle has just also dropped, as well as the audiobook version, and the audiobook version is narrated by someone called Susan Momoko Hingley, and she's a native speaker, so she's got all the pronunciations correct, which is great. And so the audiobook is fantastic. I really recommend it.
That's cool.
But otherwise, please look out for book 2 coming soon.
I'm really excited for the Kindle because I had to put it on my wish list. So I actually just realized the other day I hid it when we went on vacation just in case somebody broke into my house, and now I forgot where I put it. But I'm sure it's sitting in there on my wish list saying, "Hey, this is active now." So that's really exciting. I'm gonna have to go and do that first thing today. That's awesome. Well, Ann, I really want to thank you for coming today. I was really excited that we could connect on Twitter. Twitter and TikTok are like how my kind of go fishing for authors on there. So I was really excited to see your book and to read about it. So I'm really excited to read it. And like I said, I'm going to definitely get a paper copy for my classroom. So I hope that, we can get some younger readers involved, at least in my area for you, which I think will be cool. I always like to also read a book and then talk about it with them. It just makes it more fun and more real. But yeah, I'm really excited to hear about book 2. Can't wait to see what you do with your origami magic. That's one of the cooler ideas that I've heard within the last couple of months in particular. I've talked to a lot of authors, and I'm very jealous that you came up with that idea. So you got my mind whirling, and I've been looking at everyday things, I would say, in a different way. So you never know, maybe you'll be my inspiration for coming up for, a cool magic system. We can only hope. My readers are like, please, please, please. You want to make sure we just remind the audience, you can find Ann's all of her social links in the description. Again, you can find this on YouTube, Spotify, RSS.com. Make sure you go ahead and click on her socials. Please go buy her books. I need her to sell a lot so that she can keep writing and give me more cool things like origami magic. But Ann, again, I wish you good luck for book 1. Again, I'm really jealous of that cover. Hoping my cover guy actually showed it to him the other day. I was like, this is a really cool one. I have yours and maybe like 4 others that we're kind of perusing to look at different styles and stuff. So but yeah, I wish you luck with book 1. I hope you do amazing, and book 2, I hope you guys find a good title for it and do just as well with that one.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, anytime you want to come by and talk about writing, or you want you guys get that title, and you want to get out there once book 2 is ready. We want people to keep coming back and using this as a source to to get their news updates, things like that out there. So anytime you want to come back, you just get a hold of me on Twitter, my friend, and we will set it up for you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. You have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.